"Go find another table. This one's for family." The words spoken by my sister Victoria were not shouted. They were delivered with the cool, pleasant tone she used to order a latte, a melodic dismissal that sliced through the polite hum of the restaurant. I froze, my hand hovering over the back of the empty chair next to my mother. For a dizzying second, the sounds of the Capitol Grill faded to a dull roar in my ears. The clinking of heavy silverware, the murmur of conversations, the soft jazz spilling from hidden speakers. All of it became distant, unreal. There was only the polished mahogany of the chair beneath my hand and the chasm that had just opened at my feet. This was my father's retirement party, a milestone meant to be shared. The room was a theater of success, all dark wood, starched white tablecloths, and the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. And I, his firstborn, had just been publicly excommunicated from the main stage. Victoria's smile was as sharp and brittle as spun sugar. She sat perfectly poised in a shimmering silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, the living embodiment of the successful lifestyle blogger she played on the internet. Beside her, my mother, Margaret, offered a slight, approving nod, her perfectly coiffed hair not moving a single inch. Her posture radiated a quiet satisfaction. This was the world as it should be. My father, Richard Vance, the man of the hour, the man whose honor we were all gathered to celebrate, did the one thing he did best: nothing. He simply turned his attention to a colleague on his other side, becoming suddenly intensely engrossed in a story about golf. His silence was not an absence of sound. It was a fortress, its walls built brick by brick. Over 35 years, and I was firmly on the outside. A wave of heat washed over my face as I felt the pitying, uncomfortable glances from his oldest friends. They had witnessed the execution and were now politely looking away from the body. "There's a spot right here, Eleanor," a kind voice said. It was Dr. Albright, one of my father's most respected peers, a quiet man with kind eyes. He gestured to the empty chair beside him, a few seats down from the epicenter of my humiliation. My gratitude was a painful lump in my throat. I mumbled my thanks and quickly sat, my whole body feeling stiff and foreign, as if it belonged to someone else. Dr. Albright, bless him, tried to smooth over the chasm. "Your father was just telling me your research is going quite well," he said, his voice a welcome anchor. "Something about cellular regeneration?" For a single hopeful moment, a flicker of light pierced the gloom. I opened my mouth to speak, a genuine smile forming on my lips. "Yes, we're making some progress on—" "Oh, Ellie's work is so intricate," my mother cut in, her voice loud enough to carry, reclaiming the narrative. She leaned forward, a queen addressing her court. "All day long in a laboratory with those tedious microscopes. We just wish she had a tenth of Victoria's wonderful flair for living, for enjoying the world." Victoria, sensing her cue, followed the attack seamlessly. "Mom, don't say that," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand, a gesture of false magnanimity. "Someone has to do the boring jobs, I suppose." She then looked directly at me, her eyes sweeping over my simple navy blue dress with an expert's appraisal. "You should try to get out more, Ellie, all that time cooped up. Honestly, you always look so tired. It's aging you." The insult, so personal and so public, landed like a physical blow. But my mother wasn't finished. This was her grand finale. She turned her body slightly, addressing the guests around her, as if I were a curious, disappointing specimen under glass. "That's my eldest," she said, shaking her head with a sigh that was pure theater. "Always so serious. We had hoped she would be the pride of the family, But sometimes academic success isn't everything. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle on the table. What's important is knowing how to make your parents happy. And there it was, the thesis statement of my entire life, delivered with a serene smile. My life's work, my passion, the 15 years of relentless, exhausting dedication, all of it dismissed as a character flaw, a fundamental failure to perform the only job that mattered, reflecting their own glory. I sat there, paralyzed, my hand trembling slightly as I reached for my water glass. The ice cubes rattled against the crystal, a tiny, frantic sound in the cavernous silence that followed. In that opulent room, I had never felt more invisible. My mother's words weren't a knife, they were 1,000 tiny needles, pushed into my skin, not just by her, but by my sister's casual cruelty, and, most painfully of all, by my father's calculated, deafening silence. They had built this story for years, and tonight they were cementing it in stone. I was the disappointment, the boring, serious, aging daughter who didn't even deserve a seat at the table. I don't remember saying goodbye. I think I simply vanished, slipping out while my father was accepting another round of backslapping congratulations, a ghost leaving her own haunting. The cold Boston air was a shock after the stuffy, over-perfumed warmth of the restaurant, a welcome slap of reality that stung my cheeks. Inside the quiet sanctuary of my car, the silence was a blessing. I leaned my forehead against the cool, smooth leather of the steering wheel, the engine a low, steady hum beneath me, and just breathed, one slow breath in, one shaky breath out. As I pulled into the sparse, late-night traffic, the city lights blurred into long, weeping streaks of gold and red through my windshield. Each passing street lamp seemed to trigger a memory, fragments of a past that all pointed directly to this exact moment, this specific humiliation. It wasn't just tonight. Tonight was merely the grand finale of a lifetime's performance, the culmination of 1,000 smaller cuts. The injustice I felt wasn't a fresh wound, it was a chronic ache, and the solitary drive home became a journey through its deepest, most tender pains. My 16th birthday flickered into view, as clear as the headlights in my rearview mirror. Victoria, who was turning 14, had spent weeks circling a specific Coach handbag in a magazine, leaving it open on the coffee table. On the morning of our shared party, she got it. I can still see the reverent way my father filmed her unwrapping it, the way the light caught the polished leather as she hugged it to her chest. My mother beamed with a pride usually reserved for a Nobel laureate. My gift, presented to me with a perfunctory pat on the arm, was a heavy cellophane-wrapped set of advanced placement chemistry textbooks. "Focus on what you're good at, dear," my mother had said, her voice bright and final. "This will serve you well." I spent the rest of the party in the corner, trying to feel grateful for the books, while my heart felt as heavy as the pages within them. They weren't a gift, they were a directive, a neatly packaged confirmation of my designated role. The serious academic one, not the one worthy of beauty or frivolous celebration. The memory dissolved, replaced by the imagined screech of tires on wet pavement. I was 21, and Victoria, home from her first year of college, had taken my father's car to meet friends. She'd returned with the front bumper crumpled, her face a mask of theatrical tears. She swore I had distracted her, that I'd called her cell at the exact wrong moment, causing her to swerve. It was a blatant lie. My phone records would have proved it, but they never asked to see them. They just saw their distraught golden child, and, in me, a convenient scapegoat. "You're the older sister, Eleanor," my father had said. his voice thick with a disappointment that was all too familiar. "You have to be more responsible. You should have known better." They made me use the money I'd painstakingly saved from my waitressing job, every last dollar meant for a down payment on a more reliable car for myself, to pay for the repairs. I remember handing over the stack of bills, the product of endless hours on my feet, of smelling like grease and cheap coffee. The injustice of it was a bitter pill I was forced to swallow without water. Victoria never even said thank you. She just went out the next weekend with her friends, the incident already forgotten. For her, the city lights softened as I turned onto my quieter, tree-lined street. The final memory, the one that still felt the rawest, surfaced with an unwelcome clarity. The day I received my master's degree in biochemistry with honors. It was, until that point, the proudest, most significant moment of my life. I had invited them weeks in advance, begging them to come. They arrived 20 minutes after my name was called, missing the entire procession, my walk across the stage, everything. The excuse? They'd had to drive Victoria to a last-minute casting call for a local furniture store commercial. It was a real callback, Ellie, a big opportunity, my mother had whispered, as if that explained everything. Her career is at such a delicate stage, you understand. I understood perfectly. They stayed for 15 minutes, long enough for a single hurried photograph, where their smiles looked strained, before rushing off to pick Victoria up. I stood there for an hour after they left, a solitary figure in my cap and gown, watching my classmates celebrate with their laughing, beaming families. They were being hugged, given bouquets, swept away for celebratory dinners. I just stood there, clutching my diploma in its heavy cardboard folder. In that moment, the embossed paper inside felt less like an achievement and more like proof of my profound, unshakable solitude. The weight of it wasn't from the knowledge it represented, but from the complete and utter meaninglessness it held in the eyes of the only people whose validation I had once so desperately, foolishly craved. Pulling into my designated parking spot, I shut off the engine. The silence that filled the car was different now. It was no longer a comforting blessing. It was a void, an emptiness that echoed the one inside me. Tonight, at the restaurant, they hadn't done anything new. They had simply held up those textbooks, that repair bill, that lonely graduation photograph, and presented them as evidence to the world. "This is who she is," they had declared. And for the first time, sitting alone in the darkness of my car, a cold, hard thought began to form in the deepest part of me. A thought that felt less like an emotion and more like a scientific certainty. You are right, this is who I was, but it is not who I am going to be. The decision I made in the dark of my car the night before did not feel like a lightning strike of rebellion. It felt like the slow, quiet, inevitable dawn I was now watching from my laboratory window. The sky over Boston was shifting from a deep indigo to a soft, bruised purple, the same colors that seemed to be blooming under my skin. My lab was my sanctuary, a world of quiet, orderly truth. Here there was no room for interpretation or the emotional manipulation my family specialized in. There was only data, evidence, and the relentless pursuit of fact. The sterile scent of isopropyl alcohol, the low, steady hum of the ventilation system, the satisfyingly solid click of a pipette. These were the sensory details of my real life, more comforting to me than any hollow "I love you" had ever been. My work was not, as my mother had so dismissively put it, intricate. It was a war waged on a microscopic scale, a battle for understanding. That morning, I was tracking the expression of a specific protein in a series of cell cultures, a protein that could one day be a target for a new class of drugs. Peering into the eyepiece of the confocal microscope, I was no longer Eleanor Vance, the disappointing daughter. I was an explorer in a glowing universe of fluorescing greens and reds, a cartographer of the very building blocks of life. Each perfectly imaged cell, each correctly identified genetic sequence, was a tiny victory against the chaos of disease, a small but concrete piece of truth. This was my world, a world where results were earned, not gifted, and where truth could not be twisted by pretty words or a well-practiced sigh. My lunch was, as usual, a container of plain Greek yogurt and a gala apple, eaten at my desk while a program I'd written ran an analysis on a new dataset. As the code scrolled down the screen, I allowed myself a 2-minute break, a brief surfacing for air. Out of a painful, self-destructive habit, a need to pick at the wound, I opened my phone and tapped on the familiar, colorful icon of Instagram. Victoria's latest post was right at the top of my feed. It was a picture of her, impossibly tan and toned, laughing on a pristine white sand beach in Bali. She was holding a coconut with a tiny umbrella in it, and the turquoise water stretched out behind her like a movie backdrop. The caption read, "Some people dream of success. I wake up and manifest it. Sicker living my truth, boss babe, wanderlust." Beneath the text, almost hidden, were the tagged accounts of the resort, the bikini brand, and the artisanal straw hat she was wearing. It wasn't a vacation, it was a transaction. A bitter taste rose in my throat that had nothing to do with the tartness of my apple. Manifest it. I thought of the decade it took me to pay off my student loans, while Victoria was using our parents' money to fund her journey of self-discovery through Southeast Asia. I was working 2 jobs. From 9 to 5, I was a junior lab technician, cleaning glassware and running basic assays for other, more senior scientists. From 6:30 to 9:30, 3 nights a week, I was tutoring struggling pre-med undergraduates in organic chemistry. I remembered one student in particular, a boy with a brand new BMW, who complained endlessly about how hard the material was, while I, running on 4 hours of sleep and cheap coffee, patiently explained molecular bonds, a concept that, to me, was as beautiful and elegant as any poem. Every dollar I made from those sessions was a tiny brick in the wall of my independence, a wall I was building to keep them out. They had never offered to help, of course. They saw my struggle as a fitting, if slightly embarrassing, consequence for choosing a path that offered no glamour, no social currency they could spend. When I finally paid off the last loan, I didn't tell them. I just logged into my account, saw the 0 balance, and felt a quiet, profound sense of liberation. It was a silent, private victory, a quiet severing of one of the last threads that connected my financial reality to their world. I looked at Victoria's hashtag #YourChuggerBossBabe and thought of the Saturday mornings I'd spent in my small apartment with a pot of coffee, a stack of library books, and a sheer wall of frustration, teaching myself Python. I knew my research would one day require me to analyze massive datasets, and I couldn't afford the formal courses. I remember one night staring at a single syntax error for 2 hours, feeling the hot sting of tears in my eyes, wanting to give up. But I didn't, and the moment the code finally ran, the moment the correct output appeared on my screen, was a rush of triumph more real and satisfying than 1,000 Bali sunsets. I locked my phone and pushed it away. The image of the beach and the empty, smiling girl faded, replaced by the comforting, complex reality of the data on my screen. The program had finished running, And there it was. My protein was there. It was expressing exactly as I had hypothesized. A small, genuine smile touched my lips, a smile that was all my own. They saw a boring life of sacrifice and solitude. They saw a woman who was aging and tired. They failed to understand that sacrifice is an investment. They saw a tunnel. They didn't see the light at the end of it. They thought I was standing still, but I had been digging my way to freedom for years. In the quiet, in the dark, with nothing but my own 2 hands. And I was almost finished. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a few weeks after my father's retirement party, when the email appeared in my inbox. The subject line was stark and uninformative. Meeting. The sender was Helen, the long-serving and notoriously unflappable executive assistant to Mr. Harrison, the director of the institute. My stomach immediately clenched. A summons like this was rare and usually meant one of 2 things. Your funding was being cut, or you had made a very serious mistake. A cold knot of anxiety followed me down the long, sterile hallway to the executive suite on the top floor. My entire life, a call from authority had been a prelude to criticism. I automatically ran a list of my recent transgressions in my head. Had I been late with a report? Was there a discrepancy in my latest budget request? My mind, conditioned by years of familial scrutiny, was an expert at anticipating blame. Mr. Harrison's office was nothing like the ornate, performative spaces my parents favored. It was a room dedicated to thought. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 of the 4 walls, crammed with scientific journals and leather-bound classics. The 4th wall was a single pane of glass with a commanding view of the Charles River. He sat behind a large, uncluttered mahogany desk, a man in his early 60s with a quiet dignity that filled the room. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes, when he looked up as I entered, were direct and clear. "Eleanor, thank you for coming. Please sit," he said, gesturing to one of the 2 simple chairs opposite his desk. I sat, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, my back ramrod straight. He didn't waste time on pleasantries, a trait I had always admired. He picked up a thin, bound document from his desk. I recognized it immediately as the quarterly progress report I had submitted last week. "I've been reading your latest findings on the X23 protein," he began, his voice calm and measured, my heart hammered against my ribs. "Your methodology for isolating the signaling pathway, it's unorthodox." I braced for the impact. Unorthodox. A word my parents would use. A synonym for wrong. "It's also brilliant," he continued, and the word hung in the quiet air of the office, so unexpected that for a moment I wasn't sure I had heard him correctly. "The way you approached the problem, Eleanor, it's not just intelligent, it's creative, genuinely innovative." He looked at me over the top of the report, and for the first time in my life, I felt the profound, disorienting sensation of being truly seen by someone in a position of authority. He wasn't just praising the result, he understood the work, the thought process, the years of accumulated knowledge that had led to that one small creative leap. It was a validation so pure and so potent, it almost brought tears to my eyes. He put the report down. "Which brings me to the reason I asked you here. The board has just approved the final funding for our new European campus in Geneva." He paused, letting the weight of the statement settle. The Geneva campus was the Institute's most ambitious project in 50 years, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to translational medicine. "We are building a new department there, focused specifically on advanced cellular therapies. We need someone to lead it. Not just to manage it, but to build it from the ground up. To set the scientific agenda for the next decade." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. We need a leader, Eleanor, not just a manager. We need a scientist with vision. We need you. The words seemed to echo in the space around me. Geneva, led, you. It wasn't just a promotion. It was an entirely new life. It was a key. It was a clean slate on a different continent. An ocean away from the suffocating weight of my family's expectations. It was more than an opportunity. It was an escape hatch, a weapon, a declaration that everything my family had dismissed as my weakness, my seriousness, my focus, my quiet dedication, was, in fact, the very source of my greatest strength. I couldn't speak. I could only nod, a single sharp movement of my head, as a fragile, unfamiliar feeling began to bloom in my chest. It felt like hope. The hope Mr. Harrison had given me was a fragile living thing. For the first time in years, I felt a lightness in my step, a sense of a future I was building toward, not just an existence I was enduring. I threw myself into the monumental task of preparing for the transition to Geneva, working late into the evenings, my mind filled with staffing plans, equipment requisitions, and research protocols. It was a complex, beautiful puzzle, and I was happy. It was in the midst of this newfound peace that the first crack appeared in the foundation. It came in the form of a phone call on a Sunday morning. My phone buzzed, and Victoria's name flashed on the screen, a name I hadn't seen initiate a call in months. I almost didn't answer. Our conversations were usually stilted, obligatory affairs on holidays and birthdays, but a flicker of something, curiosity, a deeply buried and foolish sense of duty, made me pick up. Ellie, hi. Her voice was a cascade of honeyed warmth, a tone she usually reserved for schmoozing potential sponsors for her blog. It was so out of character, it was immediately suspicious. I was just thinking about you and wanted to see how you are. I'm fine, Victoria, busy, I said, my guard already up, my voice cooler than I intended. Oh, I know, you're always so busy with your important work, she gushed, ignoring my tone. Listen, things with my brand are just exploding, it's amazing. But you know how it is, cash flow can be a little tricky when you're scaling up so fast. Just some boring business stuff. She sighed dramatically, a sound effect designed to elicit sympathy. Anyway, I'm so proud of you. We all are. The call ended as abruptly as it began, leaving a strange, cloying residue in the air, like cheap perfume. A week later, she called again. This time, after 5 minutes of empty flattery about how she'd always admired my big brain, she got to the point. So this incredible opportunity has come up, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. A collaboration with a wellness tech company. It's a total game changer, Ellie. But I need to secure the initial investment fast, or I'll lose it. It's only $5,000, just a little seed money to show I'm serious. I was silent. $5,000 was not a little seed money. It was 2 months' rent. It was the emergency fund I had painstakingly built, a bulwark against the unexpected. I'll pay you back as soon as the first round of funding comes through, I swear, she pleaded, her voice taking on a whining edge. With interest, please, Ellie, you're my sister. You're the only one I can trust. Every rational part of my brain, the part that analyzed data and recognized patterns, screamed no. It was a terrible idea. I knew with scientific certainty that I would never see that money again. But a lifetime of conditioning is a powerful force. A small, foolish part of me, the part that still remembered a time before the roles of golden child and scapegoat were set in stone, felt a pang of guilt. Maybe this time will be different, it whispered. Maybe this is a real chance for her. I knew it was a lie, but it was a lie I paid for. In the sterile blue and white interface of my banking app, I transferred the money, watching the number in my savings account shrink. I told myself I wasn't enabling her, I was just buying myself some peace. Of course, it didn't buy me peace, it bought her a license. The calls became more frequent. The sweetness in her voice was replaced by a strained, desperate edge. The $5,000 was gone, invested in a way she couldn't quite explain. Something about supply chain issues, and now she needed more. "Ellie, you have such a prestigious job, a great reputation," she said one evening, her flattery now feeling like sandpaper on my nerves. I was thinking, there's a small business loan I'm applying for. It's just a formality, really. But it would look so much better if I had a co-signer. Someone solid, someone with a real job, someone like you. The blood in my veins turned to ice. "No, Victoria," I said, my voice flat and final. "Absolutely not." "But it's just signing a paper. It doesn't mean anything," she insisted, the sweet facade finally cracking to reveal the petulant, entitled child beneath. "You don't even have to give me any money. God, why do you have to be so difficult? Do you want me to fail?" "It means I would be legally responsible for your debt when you default," I said, my voice as cold as my blood. "The answer is no." I hung up before she could start crying, my hand trembling with a mixture of anger and disgust. The line had been crossed. This wasn't just irresponsibility anymore. This was a deliberate attempt to entangle me, to endanger the future I was so carefully constructing. 2 days later, the email arrived. It was from a James Peterson with a generic Gmail address. The subject was follow-up on Vance Biotech investment. My heart stopped. It felt like I had swallowed a stone. I opened it with a sense of profound dread. "Dear Dr. Vance, it was a pleasure connecting with your sister Victoria regarding your new biotech venture. The prospectus she shared about the fund, leveraging your specific research into protein X23 and its applications in regenerative medicine, is incredibly exciting. Her passion for the project is infectious. As discussed, I have wired my initial investment of $25,000 and am eager to receive the first quarterly report. Please let me know when would be a good time to discuss the next funding stage." I read it 3 times, the words blurring together. Vance Biotech, my research, protein X23. She had used specifics, details she could have only gleaned from overhearing me on the phone or reading a report I'd foolishly left. On the table during a holiday visit, a cold sweat broke out on my neck. This wasn't just a lie, it was a forgery. She was using my name, my credentials, my entire professional identity. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of my desk. My fingers felt like ice as I typed a terse reply. "Mr. Peterson, I believe you have been grievously misinformed. I am not involved in any such venture. I am a research scientist at the Boston Research Institute, and I do not manage any private funds. You should direct any and all future inquiries to Victoria Vance." Just as I hit send, my phone rang. Caller ID, Mother. Her voice, unlike Victoria's, wasn't sweet. It was heavy with a deep, sorrowful disappointment, her most effective and well-honed weapon. "Eleanor," she began, her tone saturated with pain. "I just got off the phone with your sister. She was in tears, absolute hysterical tears. Mom, you don't understand what. I understand that your sister, who is trying so hard to make something of herself in a very difficult world, asked you for a little help, and you turned your back on her," she cut in, her voice quivering with manufactured hurt. "Family is supposed to support each other. After everything we've done for you, is it so much to ask that you show a little loyalty? You always were the selfish one. Always jealous of her spirit? Always just thinking about yourself and your little projects? I said nothing. There was nothing to say. Arguing was like trying to reason with a hurricane. I just listened to the familiar accusations, the well-worn narrative of my failures. When she finally finished, I quietly ended the call. I sat in the silence of my apartment, the glow of the computer screen illuminating my face. The bright, hopeful future in Geneva seemed like a distant memory from another life. In its place was the cold, hard certainty of a gathering storm, a storm that had my name written all over it. The storm broke not with a thunderclap, but with the quiet, clinical tone of a surgeon delivering a fatal diagnosis. It began with a call from Helen, Mr. Harrison's assistant, a woman I'd known for a decade, whose professional warmth was a constant in the often stressful world of the Institute. But today there was no warmth. Her voice was brittle, efficient, and cold. "Mr. Harrison needs to see you in the main conference room immediately. He's with legal." Legal? The word landed in my stomach like a block of ice. I walked the long, sterile hallway to the executive suite, my sensible shoes making a lonely, echoing sound on the polished linoleum. It felt like the Green Mile. My mind, conditioned by a lifetime of anticipating blame, frantically scanned for my crime. Had I been late with a quarterly report? Was there a discrepancy in my latest budget request for reagents? The possibilities felt small and pathetic, like looking for a misfiled library book while the building burned down around you. When I pushed open the heavy oak door, the scene was worse than I could have imagined. The air in the room was thick and still. Mr. Harrison was there, but he was not at the head of the massive conference table. He sat off to one side, his face a mask of grim neutrality, his hands steepled in front of him. He looked like a man attending a funeral. At the head of the table sat two strangers, a man and a woman in severe dark suits that seemed to absorb the light in the room. Their stillness was the kind you see in Predators. They were lawyers. A thick, bound document, several inches thick, sat on the table in front of them like an indictment. "Dr. Vance, thank you for joining us," the man said, his voice devoid of any emotion. He did not introduce himself, and he did not smile. "Please, have a seat." I sat opposite them, the vast, polished surface of the table, reflecting my pale, anxious face. I felt small and utterly alone. "A serious matter has been brought to the Institute's attention," the woman began, her voice sharp and precise, each word a carefully placed scalpel. "In the past 48 hours, we have been contacted by several individuals regarding allegations of investment fraud." I stared at her, my mind a complete, uncomprehending blank. "Fraud? I don't understand." "The scheme in question," the man continued, pushing the bound document a few inches toward me, "improperly and illegally uses the Institute's name and reputation to solicit funds." He paused, his eyes locking onto mine. "Specifically, Dr. Vance, it uses your name." He opened the document. The first page was a high-gloss printout of a website. My own face smiled back at me, a professional headshot they must have lifted from the Institute's internal directory. The name across the top of the page, in a sleek, modern font, was Vance Biocapital. Below it was a tagline, "Investing in the future of life itself, led by pioneering researcher Dr. Eleanor Vance." I felt the air leave my lungs in a ragged, silent gasp. My hands, of their own accord, reached out and began to turn the pages. It was a descent into a nightmare. There were fabricated quotes attributed to me, glowing testimonials about my visionary leadership and unparalleled business acumen. There was a section on our flagship research, which was a poorly plagiarized, dumbed-down summary of my work on the X23 protein. My life's work, my passion, reduced to cheap, grotesque marketing copy. It was my life, my identity, twisted into a cheap, grotesque marketing tool. The perpetrator of this fraud has solicited and received significant funds, the woman said, her voice cutting through my horrified trance. To date, we have confirmed wire transfers totaling over $200,000. Who? I whispered, though I already knew the answer. The blood was roaring in my ears, a tidal wave of betrayal. Who would do this? Mr. Harrison finally spoke, his voice heavy with a sorrow that offered no comfort, only confirmation. Eleanor, the primary contact, the person who created this, was your sister, Victoria Vance. And then, the lawyer delivered the final devastating blow, the one that shattered the last remaining fragments of my composure. One of the primary victims who came forward, he said, consulting a sheet of paper with a cold detachment, is a Mr. David Henderson, a retired colleague of your father's, I believe. He invested his entire retirement annuity, $50,000. David Henderson. A kind, gentle man with a warm smile and twinkling eyes. He and his wife had been at my father's retirement dinner. He'd shaken my hand and asked me about my work with genuine, unfeigned interest, while my own father looked on with indifference. Victoria had taken his life savings. My family had devoured one of their own. Due to the direct use of your name, your research, and your position, at this institute, you represent a significant conflict of interest and a potential liability, the woman stated, her voice as sharp as glass. Effective immediately, you are placed on administrative leave pending a full internal investigation. You are to have no access to your lab or any institute resources. You will need to be escorted from the building. Mr. Harrison looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep, institutional regret. Eleanor, I am truly sorry, he said. My hands are tied. I didn't say anything, I didn't protest. The fight had gone out of me, replaced by a profound, chilling numbness. I stood, turned, and walked out of the room. A uniformed security guard I'd never seen before was waiting in the hall. He walked beside me, a silent, imposing presence, as I made the walk of shame back to my lab, my sanctuary, now a crime scene. He watched me as I collected my purse and my keys, his gaze neutral but unwavering. I was no longer Dr. Vance, I was a risk. Back in my empty apartment, the shock began to recede, and the truth of what had just happened settled in, sharp and jagged like shards of glass in my soul. My career, the one thing I had built for myself, the one pure and true thing in my life, was in ruins. The life in Geneva, the hope, the future, all of it was gone, incinerated in the blaze of my sister's greed and my parents' willful blindness. I felt a scream building in my chest, a raw primal sound of grief and rage. But it never came out. I walked over to the small bookshelf where I kept a framed photo from my master's graduation. It was the one my parents had taken, the rushed, obligatory one. I looked at my own face in the photo, so young, so tired, so pathetically desperate for an approval that would never come. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The pain was still there, a white-hot agony, but beneath it, something else was rising. It was cold and hard and clear, like a diamond forming under immense, unbearable pressure. They hadn't just stolen money from strangers. They had tried to steal my life's work and wear it like a costume. They hadn't just ignored my achievements, they had plundered them for profit. They had taken my name, the one thing I had made for myself, and dragged it through the mud to fund their pathetic, hollow fantasies. I did not cry. My tears, I realized, were a resource they were no longer entitled to. My grief was a currency they could no longer spend. I picked up the phone, my hand perfectly steady. The time for enduring was over. The time for silence was over. It was time to demand an accounting. For 2 days, I existed in a state of suspended animation. The silence of my apartment, once a sanctuary, was now a suffocating shroud. But it was not a passive silence. On the 3rd morning, I woke up, and the grief had been burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. I made a pot of strong black coffee and sat at my small kitchen table, transforming it from a place of lonely meals into a war room. The hurt was gone, replaced by a singular, crystalline purpose. The lawyers for the Institute had been useless, focused only on protecting their own liability, treating me as a contamination to be contained. So I found another way. My methodical, research-trained mind took over. I spent hours online, cross-referencing news articles about local investment schemes, digging through public records. I was no longer a victim, I was a scientist, and this was a problem to be solved. I found a name, Michael Chen, a young, hungry lawyer at a small firm who had recently won a case against a similar wellness scam. I left a message. An hour later, he called me back. His voice was wary at first, skeptical. He thought I was calling to defend myself. "Mr. Chen," I said, my voice steady and low, "I am not calling to dispute your case. I am calling to help you win it. My sister has built her fraud on a foundation of my life's work. I can provide you with the truth, internal research codes, project timelines, unpublished data. Details so specific, they will dismantle her credibility piece by piece." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the click of a pen, the rustle of papers. He was listening. He told me about the other victims, a list of retirees, small business owners, people who had trusted a pretty face and a prestigious name. He told me about David Henderson, whose wife was so distraught she could barely speak, who now faced a future of uncertainty. And then he told me the crucial piece of information, the detail that sealed my resolve. Victoria, in her breathtaking arrogance, was hosting one final investor gala at a downtown art gallery. It was a last-ditch effort to squeeze more money from her marks before, he suspected, she disappeared for good. It was scheduled for the following night. The next evening, I did not put on a dress. I put on my armor. It was a suit I had bought for a conference in Zurich 2 years prior, a beautifully tailored navy blue wool that had cost a small fortune. I had saved for 6 months to buy it, wanting to look the part of a serious scientist on an international stage, a woman whose work spoke for itself. It was a representation of the identity I had earned, not the one I had been assigned. I pulled my hair back into a severe tight chignon at the nape of my neck. My makeup was minimal, a touch of powder, a single coat of mascara. I did not want to look beautiful. I wanted to look formidable. The gallery was exactly as I'd pictured it, a sterile white box filled with enormous, meaningless canvases of clashing colors, a perfect backdrop for a venture built on nothing. Waiters moved silently through the crowd with trays of champagne and tiny, elaborate hors d'oeuvres. The guests were a mix of the hopeful and the already fleeced, their faces a study in nervous excitement and quiet anxiety. And there, at the front of the room, on a small elevated stage, was my sister. Victoria was radiant. She wore a flowing Grecian-style gown of crimson silk, a goddess of the con. She was in the middle of her speech, her voice amplified by a microphone, weaving a fantasy of a future free from disease, a world of perpetual youth, all powered by Vance Biocapital. She spoke of synergy and disruption and paradigm shifts, a torrent of empty buzzwords that sounded impressive to those who didn't know better. In the front row, seated on two plush white chairs like royalty, were my parents. My father watched with a look of detached, intellectual pride. My mother was rapt, her face glowing, tears of joy glistening in her eyes as she watched her perfect, brilliant daughter command the room. I walked in. I did not slip in through the back. I entered through the main doors, my heels clicking with a sharp, deliberate rhythm on the polished concrete floor. A ripple went through the crowd as heads began to turn. The energy in the room shifted, the ambient chatter faltering like a failing heart. My mother saw me first. Her beatific smile curdled into a tight, angry line. She stood and moved to intercept me as I walked toward the stage, her body a rigid wall of disapproval. "Eleanor," she hissed, her voice a furious whisper, meant only for me. "What in God's name are you doing here? You are making a scene. Victoria is in the middle of her moment. Go home. Now." For a lifetime, that tone of voice, that look of icy rage, had been enough to make me shrink, to apologize, to retreat into myself. This time I felt nothing but a profound, chilling pity. I simply looked at her, at this woman who had chosen a beautiful lie over a difficult truth, and I held up a single hand, palm out, a gesture that was not a request, but a command. Stop. I did not break my stride. I walked past her as if she were a stranger, my eyes fixed on the stage, the look of utter, sputtering confusion on my mother's face. As I passed her was, I noted with a cold, clinical detachment, quite profound. Victoria had stopped talking. She stared at me, her microphone held loosely in her hand, her perfect smile frozen in place. The crowd was silent now, a collective held breath, watching the drama unfold. I walked up the 3 short steps to the stage. Victoria took an involuntary step back, her crimson dress rustling like dry leaves. I ignored her. I walked directly to the lectern, took the second microphone from its stand, and turned to face the audience. My heart was not racing. My hands were not sweating. I felt a strange and terrible calm, the absolute certainty of a scientist who has run the experiment and knows, with irrefutable data, the outcome. I looked out at the sea of confused, expectant faces. I saw David Henderson's wife in the 3rd row, her expression crumpled, with a grief that twisted my own heart. I saw my father finally looking at me, his brow furrowed in annoyance at this unseemly interruption. I saw my mother, her face a mask of pure fury, and I saw Victoria, her eyes wide with a dawning animal panic. I adjusted the microphone, the small scraping sound echoing in the silent room. "Good evening," I said. My voice was calm, clear, and amplified. The voice of a lecturer, the voice of an expert, the voice of a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. "My name is Dr. Eleanor Vance, and I am here to tell the truth." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, a sound like the tide pulling away from the shore, leaving a sudden, stark silence in its wake. My name, my real name, hung in the air, a stark contradiction to the fantasy my sister had been spinning. Victoria's face, which had been frozen in panic, now contorted into a mask of pure, venomous disbelief. "What are you talking about?" she stammered into her microphone, attempting a laugh that came out as a strangled bark. "Everyone, I'm so sorry. My sister, she's always been a bit unstable, very jealous of my success. It's a family matter." My mother, recovering from her shock, rushed to the foot of the stage, her hands clutching her pearls as if they were a life raft. "That's right," she shouted, her voice shrill with a desperation that bordered on hysteria. "She's lying. Victoria is the visionary here. This has always been her project. Eleanor wouldn't know the first thing about business." I did not look at them. I kept my gaze fixed on the audience, on the faces of the people they had deceived, people whose life savings were underwriting this pathetic theater. "For the past 15 years, I continued, my voice cutting cleanly through their frantic denials, as calm and steady as a heartbeat. I have been a research scientist at the Boston Research Institute. My work, the real work, has focused on the cellular mechanisms of aging. The protein X23 is not a marketing term. It is a complex polypeptide chain that I have dedicated the last 6 years of my life to understanding." I paused, letting the weight of my quiet, factual statement settle in the room. I could see the subtle shift in the crowd, the dawning of doubt in their eyes. They had been sold a dream, and I was giving them the cold, hard, verifiable truth. There is no Vance Biocapital. There is no investment fund. There is no wellness technology on the verge of a breakthrough. There is only a website built with my stolen photograph and my plagiarized research designed for one purpose: to take your money. "She's insane," Victoria shrieked, her composure finally shattering into a million pieces. The goddess was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. "Dad, do something, make her stop." My father, who had been sitting as still as a statue, a man carved from ice, finally stood up. He looked not at me, but at the crowd, his face a carefully arranged mask of paternal concern. "There's been a misunderstanding," he began, his voice taking on the calm, authoritative tone of a professor addressing a confused classroom. "My daughters are both very passionate, and there seems to be some professional rivalry at play." His voice trailed off as the main doors to the gallery swung open with a soft whoosh. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside, their presence immediately sucking all the remaining air out of the room. They were followed by Michael Chen, the lawyer, who carried a leather briefcase and wore an expression of grim satisfaction. And just behind him, walking with a slow, deliberate authority that commanded the attention of every person in the room, was Mr. Harrison, my former boss, the director of the Institute, a man whose reputation for integrity was a pillar of the Boston scientific community. His presence was a weapon of mass destruction aimed directly at the heart of my family's lies. Victoria's face went from pale to ashen. She looked like a ghost in her crimson dress, her knuckles white where she gripped the lectern. Mr. Harrison walked to the foot of the stage, his gaze sweeping over the silent, stunned audience before landing on me with a look of profound, unwavering respect. He did not need a microphone. His voice, though quiet, carried the weight of unimpeachable truth. "My name is Dr. Robert Harrison. I am the director of the Boston Research Institute," he said. "Dr. Eleanor Vance is one of our most brilliant and respected scientists. Her work is the sole intellectual property of the Institute. She is not, and has never been, involved in any private financial venture. What has happened here is a case of identity theft and gross predatory misrepresentation. Every word was a nail in the coffin of my family's lies." Michael Chen stepped forward, opening his briefcase with a sharp click. "My clients," he announced, his voice ringing with legal authority, "are the victims of this fraud. We have transaction records, falsified documents, and a full sworn confession from one of the scheme's web developers who was never paid." He looked directly at Victoria, his eyes cold and hard. The Boston Police Department has a warrant for your arrest, Ms. Vance, on multiple counts of wire fraud. The dam broke. Victoria let out a wail, a sound of pure animal despair, a sound I had not heard from her since she was a small child who had dropped her ice cream cone. She stumbled backward, tripping on the hem of her expensive gown, and collapsed onto the stage in a heap of red silk. "No, no, Dad, Mom, help me," she sobbed, all pretense of the powerful CEO gone, replaced by the terrified child she had always been. "I did it for us. I did it for the family." My mother tried to rush the stage, screaming, "My baby!" But one of the officers held up a firm hand, stopping her. My father stood frozen, his face a horrifying canvas of shock, shame, and dawning comprehension. The perfect facade of the Vance family, so carefully constructed over decades, had just been sledgehammered into dust in front of everyone they had ever wanted to impress. I looked down at my weeping sister, then out at my shell-shocked parents. Finally, I turned my gaze to the audience, to the victims. I saw the anger, the shock, but I also saw something else, a flicker of gratitude. The truth was ugly, it was painful, but it was out. I set the microphone down in its stand, the quiet click, punctuating the end of an era. My voice, my truth, had finally been heard. And as the police officers moved onto the stage to gently but firmly lift my sister to her feet, I felt not triumph, not joy, but a vast, quiet, and profound sense of release. The performance was over. The months that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and news headlines. A slow, grinding epilogue to the drama of that night. I did not attend the trial. My participation was confined to a small, airless room where I gave my deposition, a long and emotionally exhausting account, under the calm guidance of Michael Chen. I laid out the facts, presented the evidence of my work, and answered the questions truthfully, my voice never wavering. After that, I retreated. I left the justice system to do its work, returning to the quiet, orderly sanctuary of my own. But the consequences were impossible to ignore. They rippled outward from that gallery, touching every part of my family's carefully curated world. The punishment, when it came, was not a single swift blow, but a slow, complete, and fitting dismantling of everything they held dear. Victoria's trial was a brief, humiliating affair, faced with the overwhelming evidence, the sworn confession from her web developer, the mountain of financial records, the damning testimony of Mr. Harrison. She accepted a plea bargain. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for severity in white-collar crime, was unmoved by Victoria's tearful, coached apologies about her misguided ambition. She was sentenced to 7 years in a federal correctional facility and ordered to pay full restitution, a sum so vast it was essentially a life sentence of debt. The photos in the Boston Globe were not of a glamorous boss babe on a beach, but of a pale, terrified woman in an ill-fitting blazer, her wrists in handcuffs as she was led from the courthouse. The goddess had fallen, and she had fallen hard. Her carefully manifested reality had been replaced by a world of concrete floors and iron bars. For my parents, the punishment was quieter, but in many ways more profound. Their names were inextricably linked to the scandal, their photos splashed across the papers alongside Victoria's. Their social circle, built on a foundation of perceived respectability and success, evaporated overnight. Friends they had known for 40 years suddenly stopped returning their calls. The invitations to dinner parties and charity galas ceased to arrive. The silence of their telephone was, I imagine, the most damning verdict of all. They were pariahs, their story a piece of juicy gossip, whispered at the country club they could no longer afford. To pay for Victoria's high-priced defense attorneys and to begin the monumental task of restitution, they were forced to sell the house. The large, stately colonial in the suburbs where I had grown up, the stage for so many of my childhood humiliations, went on the market. They sold it for a loss in a buyer's market, and with the proceeds, they moved into a small, nondescript two-bedroom apartment in a part of the city they used to refer to as up-and-coming. Their world, once a sprawling map of social engagements and prestigious addresses, had shrunk to the size of their shame. David Henderson and the other victims received a portion of their money back from the sale of the house, but it was a fraction of what they had lost. Their real victory, Michael Chen told me, was seeing justice served, seeing the Vances' perfect world crumble. I heard through him that David had said they lost their reputation. That to them is worth more than any money. He was right. They had built their entire identity on the shifting sands of public opinion, and now the tide had gone out, leaving them exposed and utterly bankrupt in the only currency they had ever truly valued. And me, the Institute issued a formal public apology for the way my suspension had been handled. My name was cleared completely and unequivocally. My administrative leave was lifted, and Mr. Harrison personally reinstated me, offering not just my old job back, but the position in Geneva as well, should I still want it. The storm had passed, and in its wake, the path forward was clear. The consequences for my family were not something I reveled in. There was a quiet sadness in the totality of their ruin, but I saw it for what it was, the logical, unavoidable outcome of a lifetime of choices. It was the law of cause and effect, as immutable and impartial as any law of physics. It was, in its own terrible way, perfect justice. 6 months later, I found myself walking along the shore of a different body of water. The late afternoon sun danced on the surface of Lake Geneva, and the air that filled my lungs was crisp and clean, tasting of snow from the distant mountains. In Boston, the air had always felt heavy, thick with unspoken resentments and the weight of a past I couldn't escape. Here it was light. Here I could breathe. My new life was quieter than my old one, but it was a rich, resonant quiet. I was now the director of the Institute's European campus, a title that still felt strange and wonderful to say aloud. My lab was a marvel of glass and steel, filled with the brightest minds from a dozen different countries. We didn't compete, we collaborated. My ideas were not just heard, they were sought after, challenged with respect, and built upon with a shared, exhilarating passion for the work. There was no subtext here, no hidden agenda. There was only the science. I checked the time on my watch. I was meeting my friends, Anya and her husband Lars, for a coffee at a small lakeside cafe. Anya was our lead immunologist, a brilliant woman with a laugh that could fill a room, and Lars was a kind-eyed architect. They had taken me under their wing when I first arrived, inviting me for hikes in the Alps and quiet dinners in their warm, book-filled apartment. They had become my family, a family chosen not by the accident of birth, but by the deliberate bonds of mutual respect and genuine affection. They knew my story, not all of it, but the parts that mattered, and they had never treated me with pity, only with a simple, unwavering admiration for my resilience. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen showed a video call coming through, and the name made me smile. Mr. Harrison. Eleanor, his voice boomed, his familiar, kind face filling the screen. He was in his office in Boston, the Charles River, a gray ribbon behind him. I hope I'm not interrupting your famous European leisure time. I laughed, a sound that felt easy and natural now. Hardly, Robert. Just a walk by the lake. How are things back home? We spoke for a few minutes about work, a new grant proposal I was submitting, a promising candidate we were recruiting. The conversation was easy, a comfortable back and forth between peers. He was no longer just my boss. He had become a mentor, a friend, the wise, steady father figure I had always deserved. The work is good, he said, his expression softening. But that's not why I called. I wanted to know how you are, truly. I turned my phone around, showing him the view. The sun was beginning to set, painting the snow-capped peaks of the Alps in shades of rose and gold. The water was a deep, tranquil blue. I'm happy, Robert, I said, and the simplicity of the words, the profound truth of them, filled me with a sense of quiet wonder. I feel peaceful. I feel like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be. He smiled, a genuine, crinkling smile that reached his eyes. That's all I wanted to hear. You've earned it, my dear. You've earned it more than anyone I know. We said our goodbyes, and I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I stood there for a long moment, just watching the light change on the mountains. He was right. This life, this stunning view, this respected career, this chosen family waiting for me at a cafe, none of it had been given to me. It had been earned. It had been built, piece by painful piece, out of the rubble of a life I had finally had the courage to leave behind. My apartment in Geneva is a place of light. In the mornings, the sun spills over the Alps and fills the high-ceilinged rooms, glinting off the spines of the books that line my shelves and warming the wood of my simple, uncluttered furniture. It is a space I have curated with care, a space that feels like my own skin. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. It was a thin, lightweight envelope with a U.S. postage stamp and my name and address written in my mother's familiar, yet strangely hesitant, cursive. I held it for a long moment, feeling its weight, which was next to nothing. For years, a letter from them would have been a heavy thing, filled with the dense, unspoken weight of expectation and disappointment. This felt different. I opened it not with dread, but with a quiet, scientific curiosity. The letter inside was short, written on plain stationery. The handwriting was my father's, more cramped and deliberate than I remembered. It was the first time they had reached out since the trial. There were no accusations, no justifications, none of the familiar, toxic patterns of the past. Instead, there were clumsy, awkward sentences filled with words like regret, and we now understand, and we failed you. They wrote that they had started going to family therapy. They did not ask for my forgiveness. They did not ask for anything at all. They simply, for the first time in my life, offered an apology. I read it twice, then carefully folded the single sheet of paper and placed it on the table. A part of me had expected to feel a surge of anger, or perhaps the satisfying vindication of a long overdue admission, but I felt neither. The hot coals of my resentment had long ago cooled to ash. Forgiveness was a country I was not yet ready to visit, a language I had not yet learned to speak. But what I felt instead was a kind of calm, quiet acceptance. Their journey, their attempts at repair, was their own. It no longer had the power to harm me or to heal me. I could wish them peace from a safe, insurmountable distance. Their story was no longer my story. I walked to the large window in my living room and looked out. The sun was low in the sky, and the peaks of the Alps were beginning to glow with an ethereal, golden light. My life had been a long, difficult experiment in discovering a fundamental truth. I had learned that a true legacy is not found in a bloodline or in a name passed down through generations. A legacy is the integrity you build within yourself, the quiet choices you make when no one is watching, the stubborn refusal to be anything less than who you are. I had to lose a family to finally understand what one was. It is not an obligation, it is a choice. It is the safe harbor of people who see you, who value you, who celebrate your light, instead of trying to dim it. It is the family I was now building here, one respectful conversation, one shared laugh at a time. But most importantly, I had found myself, not the reflection I saw in my family's disappointed eyes, but the woman who stood here now, in this quiet room, bathed in alpine light. A woman who had been forged in the silence and the fire. A woman who had earned her own peace. A soft smile touched my lips as I looked out at the mountains. The view was vast and beautiful and clear, and for the first time in my life, the road ahead was entirely my own.